I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our Game Show Greats special. Ever since we were very young and sometimes used to watch 15 to 1 and or Countdown instead of children's telly when there was no good children's telly on, hopping on a game show has often been a rewarding, sometimes interesting, maybe even relaxing thing to do. If you just want to sit and watch something, be stimulated a bit, give your brain a bit of exercise perhaps, which is why Challenge TV is certainly amongst the cable channels that have been on in our lives the most since we first had access to cable TV about 25 years ago. Of course, nowadays, and indeed for quite some time now, the variety of game shows on Challenge has been very, very slim. But they used to have all sorts of great things, including all the things we're going to talk about today that we have enjoyed during our lives over the past 40 years or so. Of course, whether I'm in the mood to be entertained, mentally stimulated, or just turn the brain off when finding a game show, what is the one thing that always annoys the bejesus out of me when it happens, which it inevitably does on almost every game show?
I don't know.
It's the parts where they're not actually playing the game.
Oh, I did know that.
And really, as a general rule, the more modern game shows get, the more time there is spent on talking completely pointlessly about rubbish that these people have been prepped to say and obviously don't really specifically want to talk about on TV, though there is and always has been a fair smattering of it in all game shows. And it grinds my gears like there's no tomorrow. I remember on Pointless, when I used to watch it on catch-up as a matter of course, I used to tell it to start 5 minutes into the show and it would just be coming to the end of the pointless chat before the game. And then they started interspersing it throughout the questions, so you couldn't do that. It's so annoying. Play the game and let me join in from home. The first game show great I've got written down here to talk about really is a true national institution and has been on Channel 4 since Channel 4 began in November 1982 when I was in utero. And that, of course, is Countdown, which has already been mentioned as one of the things we watch when there wasn't particular children's telly to watch.
When I was a child, I used to like Countdown better than general knowledge-based game shows because I never knew any of the answers on those, but I've always enjoyed word games, and I used to feel very proud if I managed to come up with a 5-letter word. I'm quite a lot better at it now. I was usually flummoxed by the numbers game. I could get 402 if there was a 402, for instance. I'm better at that now too, but back then it really was nearly all letters games and only 2 numbers games before they changed the format, and I did used to find that very stimulating.
When you were finding some Countdown on catch-up a few years ago, which it's very easy to do, of course, dip in and out of new Countdown, old Countdown. It's always the same basic game and you can always join in, try and make your own words and solve the number puzzles yourself. I was particularly struck when you were watching the first episode from 2004 and everyone was saying Richard, Carol, Susie, whoever was the celebrity guest. Here we are for another year of Countdown, everything ticking along nicely as usual, as it had been for the past 22 years, Richard and Carol having been there that entire time, of course, and Richard Whiteley was saying, it's my 60th birthday this year. Look, my brain still works. I've solved this number puzzle when nobody else did, even you, Carol. Still life in the old dog yet, and so on. And I was thinking, how sad, how typical of life that this year, 2004, is actually the last whole year of Countdown you're all going to be doing before Richard Whiteley passed away in 2005. And it just made me reflect on life in general. They've been doing that for 22 years. No reason to think they won't be doing it for about another 22. And then, in the blink of an eye, it can all just finish the next year when you're not even expecting it. And yet, even since then, the show has continued. And what an enjoyable job Nick Hewer did on it for 10 years as the host.
I enjoyed Nick Hewer and Rachel Riley more than I enjoyed Richard and Carol, I'm afraid. I used to enjoy them too, and obviously they were the staples of the show and will always be iconic. I just got really into it when Nick and Rachel were doing it. I found Nick's natural kind of chatter and true stories a bit more engaging than Richard Whiteley's brand of jokes and chat.
I remember the documentary probably for 20 years of Countdown or something like that, talking about how Richard was such a bumbling fool as a host, but everyone loved him for it. He was supposed to have this catchphrase, 9 in a line, 30 seconds is the time, which doesn't rhyme anyway, and he changed it to 9 in a line, let's get on with the game.
Also, at that point, the Nick and Rachel era, I got quite good at the game. Actually, I was beating the bejesus out of a lot of the contestants, which I haven't been able to do if I've ever found any old Richard and Carol ones. The standard of play and the standard of general knowledge, as well as vocabulary and math skills, is going down now. It's not the olden days anymore, I think.
And of course, Rachel Riley is building herself up an impressive tenure on the show. What's she at now? 16 years? So a way to go to catch up with Carol Vorderman, but who's to say she won't get there?
Poor Carol didn't want to leave, did she? She was pushed.
Behind the scenes politics coming into play there.
I have got a slight criticism of Rachel Riley, which is that she isn't very flexible when she's looking for solutions to the numbers problems. She will always try to make two factors and multiply them together, and often it works. I have seen her be completely stumped by one that after the commercial break she turned around and said, oh, actually it's quite easy, I just couldn't find the two factors.
But let's move on to our next game show. The other one that has been mentioned along with Countdown, having been on Channel 4 during children's television time, 15 to 1. Originally running from 1988 to 2003 with William G. Stewart. What a wonderful job he did. He used to be a producer and deviser of game shows, of course, and stepped into a hosting role there. And his dry, sardonic, but quite nurturing, humorous style was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoy watching him. And a brilliant thing about 15 to 1 with William G. Stewart is it's practically all questions. No faffing about with the contestants telling you about the time they accidentally dropped their keys in a bowl of jelly or something. Only if there was a short round 2 did you get a very brief voiceover telling us a couple of quick, innocuous things about the 3 finalists. John lives in Weston-super-Mare and enjoys making models of barnyard animals out of papier-mâché, and then we move on to the next person and get on with the questions nice and quickly. I always liked that. And that's what I didn't like about the revival version from the 2010s with Sandy Toksvig. So much faffing about talking to the contestants. With William G. Stewart, when you've lost all your lives, he says the right answer, your light goes out, you sit down, everyone forgets you exist. Whereas with Sandy Toksvig, we have to spend 5 minutes going, oh, you've lost your last life, oh, go back and enjoy your Navajo rug weaving and Westmoreland. Just get on with the damn show, Sandy, is what I say. But of course, the questions were still there to enjoy.
They were way easier than William G. Stewart's questions, which is symptomatic of people having less general knowledge.
Yes, as a child viewer of 15 to 1 with William G. Stewart, it wasn't very easy to join in with. I think it was more fun in those days, when we were very young, to watch the lives disappearing. But then as we got into our teens, and sometimes watched it after secondary school, it was interesting to answer some of the questions. And I remember we were very excited when that chap got the highest possible final score, which is 433. 400 points final round, 30 points for having the 3 lives from round 2, and 3 points for having 3 lives from round 1.
When I was a child, I could never understand why in round 2, when they were nominating, they didn't go straight for the people with 1 life left. They sometimes went for people with 2. Of course, they're trying to get as many as possible down to 1 life and stay on 2 lives themselves and have less chance of getting chosen and certainly less chance of losing their last life in the latter stages.
You used to get quite a variety of how many people actually made it through to round 2. Didn't I read somewhere it was always at least 5, but sometimes only 1 or 2 people will go out in round 1, and is there even an episode or 2 where all 15 of them get through to round 2? Wouldn't surprise me. I've had phases of watching repeats of 15 to 1 on YouTube, maybe Challenge. I like the celebrity specials, where some people are trying to muck about and not take it seriously, like sometimes happens on these celebrity things, and William G. Stewart gets very cross with that. Come on and play the game, for goodness sake. And I agree with you, William G. Stewart. One of the contestants on that Celebrity 15 to 1 I'm thinking of, that probably took it about as seriously as William G. Stewart wanted, was Bob Holness, who of course hosted Blockbusters on ITV from 1983 for about 10 or 11 years. And what a wonderful job he did doing that. The ultimate sort of fusty, slightly out of touch with modern culture teacher figure, but still very cool and very genuine and very heartfelt and endearing with it. I used to enjoy Blockbusters after children's ITV when I was very young. My mum used to like to watch it, and I would watch it with her after the children's telly was over. And I'm not convinced I was able to answer any of the questions at the time, but I loved all the flashing colours and the hexagons and the lights dimming for the gold run. Put yourself on the hotspot, please. I just love the atmosphere of it all and the hexagons changing colour. But in later life, seeing it on Challenge and things, I do like the questions as well, with the initial letters. Quite quick fire, simple but sometimes challenging to answer.
Between rounds, sometimes Bob Holness does stop for a chat, which you find so annoying, but sometimes that can be quite entertaining in itself. That quite famous team, the two Pauls, who were sort of uber geeky but cute and funny, said some very amusing things in answer to Bob's questions about their hobbies and such.
Yes, they're in the first series that Challenge ever bought, which is quite a late one, I believe, from 1992. Also had very young Connie Huck on it. All the contestants, of course, were aged 16 to 18. They were all sixth formers. And yes, Bob chatting to them can provide some entertaining moments, although I do think there's rather too much of it overall. I'm still not sure I really like or can get to grips with the 2 people versus 1 people setup. You have to be very good, exceptionally good at the game to be the white player and actually win 2 of 3 or even win a single board, especially with questions getting passed across when someone gets them wrong. I always thought it was a strange setup when I was young. You don't normally see, well, that's the white team, 1 person, that's the blue team, 2 people. How does that work then?
They try to balance it out a bit by having the white player need fewer correct answers, 4 as opposed to 5 for the blue team, but it's not really enough. It is, as you said, extremely rare to see a white player win.
Yes, indeed, it's an iconic part of an iconic show, but I'm still not entirely sure I can completely happily get to grips with it in my mind, like the Jungle movie, really, which I say because we've just watched all 100 episodes and 2 movies of Hey Arnold all the way through, and perhaps we'll come back at the end of the podcast to why that might be relevant to our next episode. But in the meantime, let's talk about Family Fortunes, which started on ITV in the early 80s. It was presented by Bob Monkhouse and Max Bygraves, but then it eventually settled on a pretty long-term host in Les Dennis, who presented the show between 1987 and 2002. Rather annoyingly at times, it has to be said. But I do find the format of the questions and the surveys rather interesting. It always strikes me how a right answer isn't necessarily going to score you anything, whereas on some boards, a wrong answer could be a very high-scoring answer, even the top answer, just depending on what people in the street think. Well, of course, they're actually very meticulously organised into some sort of building where they all sit and take the survey. They're not really the street, but the principle is the same. It just depends what they're going to say, what's going to be a popular perception of an answer, rather than what is technically a correct answer. I always remember the top answer for a country beginning with A was America, which really isn't technically the name of a country, is it? We all use it when we mean the United States of America. But another very high scorer, possibly at 3 for a country beginning with A, was Africa. Completely wrong, but a very good score nonetheless. And I do like the end game. They deliberately make that harder for some, easier for others, depending on how much money they've given away recently. Some people play that rather shrewdly, some play it rather badly, but it's great fun to shout out your own answers and berate the contestants if they don't say the most obvious things, or if they do say the most obvious thing and then go in the wrong direction to try and think of something similar. They play Mallet's Mallet rather than try to think back to the actual question.
Something that you can ride.
A bicycle. A car.
Should have said horse.
Car probably didn't score anything. Timmy Mallet wouldn't whack you on the head for bicycle car, but in this game, you've got to think back to the question. Family Fortunes is a show that has far too much contestant chat, particularly with Les Dennis trying to be amusing and doing his 2 or 3 impressions that he has. The best thing to hope there is that the same team keeps getting in on all the questions, and then Les will only talk to them once and we can get him plenty of gameplay. Wipeout is something we used to watch, first of all, with our lunch in the mid-90s in school holidays, just before Neighbours, I think. And it was presented at the time by Paul Daniels, and then later, which is the iteration that Rosie remembers, Bob Monkhouse presented it, and that's the one that Challenge have had most. I think they did get hold of some Paul Daniels at some point. But I like that, picking the correct answers that fit into a certain category. I like that sort of quiz. You can have a think, now, I know that one's right, I know that one's wrong, that one possibly. Of course, if you're in the end game, you've got to remember to remain flexible and open-minded in that situation. If, for example, you find yourself trying to pick out the 6 fictional ducks, and you go straight for the obvious trap, the ugly duckling, and don't realise for the entire time that, he's actually a swan, your Wipeout wings are going to take you nowhere.
That was a case of can't see the wood for the trees, really, wasn't it? But I found that so irritating. I've always remembered it because the woman tried every other configuration but would not deselect the ugly duckling. And I got really, really, really annoyed with her.
Speaking of the endgame, which is better? Pressing the lights to light up the answers on a panel in front of you, and then going over to the big screen and pressing the reveal button with Paul Daniels, or selecting the answers from the actual big screens with Bob Monkhouse and then running back to your podium and pressing the button there.
I think, especially for children, it's better to go up and touch the answers on the big screen because it's more visually stimulating for the audience.
It might well be easier for the contestants as well because they can look what's written there and press the button underneath it rather than try and match up the positions of the answers they want with the blank grid in front of them. So yeah, I think I prefer the Bob Monkhouse way as well. But what do I not like about Bob Monkhouse presenting Wipeout that Paul Daniels never did?
Something to do with him giving away whether it's a right or wrong answer when he's setting up for the reveal.
Bob Monkhouse nearly always gives away the answer before you get the green tick or the red cross, which I found much less interesting, fun, exciting than Paul Daniels going, hoo-hoo, let's see. With Bob Monkhouse, he's got the list of children of Queen Victoria, and you say to him, Zebedee, and instead of saying, hoo-hoo, let's try Zebedee, he says, Zebedee. Oh, well, I always thought that was a character from the Magic Roundabout. Yes, Zebedee, the Magic Roundabout. But was he also one of Queen Victoria's children? Ooh, no. Well, yeah, you spoiled the reveal, Bob. Thanks very much. Of course, you could get rather annoyed with the contestants, couldn't you, if they were bidding on something that you knew perfectly well, like parts of a castle. When I was about 12, I reckoned I could easily bid 7 out of 8 on that. I think you had a particular example as well of something like that.
Characters from Watership Down, I knew all 8 of them. And they were going, 2, 3. I can't do more than 3. Stupid contestant probably got 1 or 2 of them wrong anyway.
A real lottery, of course, of the subjects you get, and you might completely luck out by getting a specialist subject, or get things that you would find rather obscure because you know nothing about it, and that's the world of game shows for you. But there we are, Wipeout. Quite enduring, quite fun, worth a mention. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was very much in the soup when it was first on ITV with Chris Tarrant between 1998 and 2014, the original run finished. I remember on The Big Breakfast, Johnny Vaughan was saying, look at this newspaper headline on tonight's Millionaire. We've got the first ever half millionaire. Somebody's finally won £500,000. That's disappointing. You can guarantee as soon as someone finally gets the jackpot, it's going to be in the paper, so it won't be a surprise. Someone realised, it should be a surprise. So when Judith Keppel did become the first millionaire on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2000, it was a complete surprise. She did it from about £32,000 with no lifelines left. I watched the last few of her questions, I think, live, and it was rather exciting. And of course, I always remember the last one. A lot of people do, I think. To which English king was Eleanor of Aquitaine married? It's Henry II, Chris. And it is Henry II. They're the parents of Richard the Lionheart and King John, among other people, of course. And that won Judith £1 million, and that was very interesting and exciting and groundbreaking.
She had a story that she told in some interview that she hadn't particularly known Henry II and had seen it on a plaque or something on a trip she'd made recently. So that was a bit of luck.
And it was always quite a tense show and rather fun to watch, particularly if you knew the answers. I always reckoned if you hadn't gone home with £32,000 or above, you probably not used your lifelines wisely and were probably a bit unlucky not to have been given more questions that you could have more of a go at. And perhaps your general knowledge wasn't as wide as a lot of people's. But still, it's a very tough game, a great lottery of what sort of questions you're going to get. I remember watching it and thinking, yes, I wouldn't mind this person's 15 questions to get to £1 million. Or, I'm not even going to get to 4,000 with this game. I have no idea about this football and this physics and whatever else it is.
One thing you definitely want to do is not leave Ask the Audience too long, because collectively the audience is likely to know what are considered the easier questions because it's something that's generally quite well known.
It always worked out quite well. If there was one you weren't sure of on the way up to £1,000 and the audience could give that to you, 98% say Fergie, we'll go with that. That's the best use of it.
What you don't want to do is say, I think it might be B, but I'm not sure. It could be C. I think it's probably B. I'll ask the audience. And then you get 90% B and 10% C and nothing for A and D because you prejudice them.
Yeah, never prejudice the audience because it becomes useless as a lifeline. Even if you end up with A, B, C and D all hovering around 25%, which happens sometimes, that's better than a result you've influenced yourself for how useful it's possibly going to be to you.
And never say which two you're torn between when you play 50-50. The number of times that you get left with the two you're torn between, I'm sorry, is too many to be a coincidence. They do it on purpose.
Computer take away to random wrong answers. It's not random at all. We used to have quite some fun watching the weekly repeats of Millionaire on a Sunday morning on ITV2, I think it was. Sometime in the noughties they used to be showing all the episodes, both the episodes, however many it was, from the week, and we'd sit and watch those from about 11 to 1, maybe have a bit of lunch, and we did enjoy doing that quite a lot. It became quite a regular thing, and a highlight there was the window cleaner from Shoebury Ness and his £125,000. Very funny and also very impressive work there.
I'm not being rude, but he's a sort of funny guy to watch, with a sort of Joe Pasquale voice and ready wit, amusing answers to Chris Tarrant's chit-chat that ordinarily is so annoying, but when it's with an entertaining contestant, then it's pretty fun to watch.
The way that he and Chris were enjoying talking together and bouncing off each other, and it obviously being rather farcical and silly but a lot of fun, was very entertaining, particularly with Phone a Friend. It's amazing what you can get done in 30 seconds, says Chris Tarrant, and he's absolutely right.
What can you get done? Spell out 4 incredibly long words that you're not sure how to pronounce. The guy on the phone takes it all in, asks you to spell out the second one again, says, I think it's that, and that's it. That's the end of your 30 seconds. And we were all absolutely on tenterhooks thinking there's absolutely no way he's going to get the answer doing this.
But he did, and it was that. Absolutely wonderful stuff. And very wisely, of course, he knew when he'd ridden his luck and left with £125,000. Absolutely excellent work.
What a contrast to the friends who will dither and dither over the phone and think not even out loud while the time's ticking away.
I like the annoying dad ringing up his teenage daughter, saying what's Agent Scully's first name on the X-Files. Dana! It's Dana! And he reads out all the options. It's Dana! You sure? Yes!
She was so right.
So yeah, some fun memories there of Millionaire. I mean, if it's going to be on TV and in the public consciousness a lot from when we're like mid-teenage to about 30, we're going to have interacted with it and got some enjoyment out of it, quite probably, aren't we? And we did. Next on my list is Going for Gold, which is something I remember being on after Neighbours at lunchtime in the school holidays, or possibly before even school had started for me. It was on in the late 80s. But I used to like watching the theme tune after Neighbours. But then when I did find repeats of it eventually, despite the fact that the theme tune was the only thing I really remembered about it, I did find that I knew the gameplay and could remember having watched the gameplay before. So I guess I must have watched it and listened to it. I think I quite enjoyed the column splitting into 4 pieces and the little light coming down it to show how many points you were going to get and who was allowed to answer the question. A bit like Blockbusters, sort of visually stimulating on-screen stuff. And that original version of Going for Gold had contestants from all over Europe, except in the final season, and it was presented by Henry Kelly, who's rather engaging and amusing and lively. But really, the time that it played a big part in our lives is when it was broadcast live on Channel 5 at lunchtime for a period of about a year, from 2008 to 2009, and it was presented by John Suchet, and there was a live phone-in competition and so on. We used to enjoy watching that, sometimes with lunch, answering the questions, listening to the woman saying Taurus because she was trying to answer a question that the answer was bull and she didn't know what it was in English, and they accepted it quite rightly.
It was what animal's head does the Minotaur have?
And we always remember how originally, for the first few episodes, they tried to get John Suchet to do all the live talking to the contestants, asking them questions, and then turn to the camera and do the phone-in competition with us. And could he keep track of it?
No, not really.
So what did they do?
They got a lady to do the phone-in competition instead, Alex.
And what was it, her second day, where John Suchet says, Alex is here, as usual? And we're like, come on, she only turned up yesterday. But she was rather fun too, and she and John used to have a bit of bants.
She got the giggles when the clues she was reading out included, I go bang when I'm pulled. The answer was a Christmas cracker.
Yes, of course, all the questions on the show are that sort of style. And the more I am, I have, I go, you hear, the easier it is to get. The very last thing might be, beginning with Z, I am who?
Zebedee?
Probably. One of my very first Mondegreens, the Going for Gold theme tune, and I certainly had a lot of them when I was young. Go Winkle, go Winkle, go. But of course it's really Going for Gold, and a fantastic theme tune it is too. An interesting story about how it was produced jointly with Reg Grundy Productions, and they'd said something like, we'll put money into this round Europe game show and show it in Australia if you buy one of our crappy things. So the BBC bought Neighbours, and the rest is history. Let's talk about Supermarket Sweep. which was originally on ITV at about 9:25 in the morning from 1993 to 2001 with Dale Winton, and he became so synonymous with the show that it did get rebranded as Dale's Supermarket Sweep.
And all the rounds were called Dale's this, Dale's that. I found that a bit irritating, actually.
It was a great thing to watch if you were off school, a reason not to hang around in bed all morning, or indeed for much of the morning. Get down there at 9:25, watch Supermarket Sweep. I often used to get downstairs and turn the telly on at about 9:30. So, of course, they'd already done the mini-sweep. And he's talking to the contestants and asking them to tell him about the time they left the tea bags in the car and it got taken off by the recovery company and so on. And I think, oh, well, I haven't missed anything then. And then you get to the bit where they're totting up their totals, and Dale says, of course, you got £25 from the mini-sweep earlier for your subtotal. And I'm like, did they? When did they do that? So that made me start getting out of bed to make sure to begin at 9:25, which is definitely worth doing to identify the first item and see if the idiot can run and pick it up within 30 seconds.
You used to go downstairs to do that. By the time I was on my phase of malingering from school, we moved to our bungalow and it was still on at 9:25.
Yes, these little differences that are caused by that 2-year age gap between us with very similar experiences, particularly considering the time we moved house when I was 13 and you were 11. A lot of sort of overlapping experiences for us that we visualise in different houses, which I do find quite interesting. But maybe the listeners didn't. But of course, Saturday shopping was a regular fixture in our lives, and it was rather fun to see a supermarket very much like Summerfield in the town where we lived. Indeed, it was kitted out by Summerfield in several series, Dale's Supermarket Sweep. Sometimes it was other shops. It was Asda at one point.
I associate it with Asda, and I think it was Asda when he would do the guess the price round, and he'd say, is it £2.25? And I think, oh, it can't possibly be as much as that. Or is it £2.50? Or is it £2.75? And I'm like, oh, £2.25 surely. And then it's £2.75.
Yes, I think when I was watching Dale's Supermarket Sweep on Challenge within the past couple of years, I thought Asda is a complete rip-off compared to Summerfield. That patting your back pocket and it jingling with change, I thought, is an absolute piece of fraud.
Those people are from extremely high-income households and they used to do all their shopping at Harrods.
There was a brief revival of Dale's Supermarket Sweep in 2007, but the show didn't come back properly until quite some years after Dale had passed away with Ryland Clark. And what did he do? 2 series in the end? And he made those rather entertaining.
I do enjoy Ryland more than Dale, I'm afraid. A lot of people who went on it have been fans of the original with Dale Winton, which could make it rather awkward because they could not get it into their heads that they don't bring the thing from the mini-sweep to Ryland. They're supposed to just take it back to their podium.
I liked in that how, as well as the mini-sweep, you got the express sweep, so you did more actual shopping. And I think both of us, if we pop to Tesco nowadays and over the past few years, find it quite useful to have a kind of express sweep list. Right, 5 things. I can remember 5 things, and we do generally, despite being in our 40s.
The thing about that makes me lament the times we live in is all the cheating. They'd actually get told off for taking things out of someone else's basket, but they shouldn't have tried it in the first place. And the shoving out of the way.
This is making me think at the end we must just go through them all and say, have they had a 21st century revamp? Have they not had one? Or have they been around continuously since the 20th century? But before we do, let's talk about the 2 things which really have current revamps that we have been watching and enjoying over the past couple of years. The first of which is The Weakest Link, which was presented so famously and uniquely by Anne Robinson between 2000 and 2011, and in more recent years has been rebooted with Ramesh Ranganathan doing an excellent job in a much more friendly way than Anne Robinson.
Now, Anne Robinson is only mucking about. She doesn't really mean it. And some people may enjoy that kind of thing, and some may not. I prefer Ramesh's gentle ribbing that he does.
I like the quick-fire questions nature of The Weakest Link. Certainly originally the voting didn't used to go on too long. I remember only about a year ago I was quite regularly watching some repeats of like the first series of The Weakest Link on Challenge. The voting was nice and quick, and then we're on to some more questions. Too quick to get some bourbons sometimes, which is very quick. But as we get further and further in, we have to have more of this forced Anne Robinson being mean to you, and the voting takes forever. So it's one of those things where the early ones are better.
With Ramesh, he has a little chat with some of them, does his gentle ribbing about their wrong answers, or gets them to explain why they voted for someone who perhaps didn't really deserve to go. And I think that goes on about the right amount of time. Some people might think it goes on a bit too long, but then I find Ramesh quite entertaining, and many of the celebrities give him quite entertaining answers.
Yes, I do like the new version. Probably more than the old one. Although, as they're all celebrities, sometimes the actual question answering isn't overall that high quality knowledge and trying to work out a plausible answer from what you do know. And of course, as they always say, and it's true, it's hard under the pressure.
The best quality Ramesh episode for correct answers and or logical guesses, be they right or wrong, was the Comedians episode. And we've spoken before on our Sooty podcast about how much we enjoyed the Puppet special with Anne Robinson and Sue winning the day.
It's true what I said there. Roland Rat had his chance and he fluffed it, and Sue swept in and took the victory very deservedly. This is another thing that was hugely in the soup. I always think of Outnumbered, with Grandad sitting in front of the TV screen and shouting, "Bank! Bank! Bank it!" And we know exactly what he's watching and indeed can relate to the feeling of wanting to shout that at the screen when it's creeping up to 500, 600, 750, whatever it is, and they're not banking and they're about to lose it all because they don't know when George Bush Sr. won his presidential election. And perhaps the ultimate example of it being very, very well known, and look at that, is how they put it in the finale of the first series of the big relaunch of Doctor Who in 2005 with the android. That was bound to get a tickle out of a lot of the audience, and it did, including us. Over the past couple of years, in the autumn term, on Saturday nights, we have enjoyed watching Ramesh with The Weakest Link, and sometimes even on the same Saturday night, the reboot of Gladiators, which the BBC has so far aired 2 series of, and they probably have made the 3rd by now, and it's been a phenomenal rating success for them, and rightly so. Why is it such a success? Well, it basically is exactly like the old show. They haven't tried to do anything stupid with it, or too stupid, and everyone is enjoying it. A bit like Countdown in that way. The format is evergreen, and you can bring it back after 20 odd years, do it the same way, and it still has the potential to be very entertaining, and it's been pulled off by the new Gladiators and many of the contestants and Barney Walsh.
It's got a lot of the classic games. It's also got some new ones. One of the new ones is The Edge. That's my favourite game, where you have to run around on this crisscross pathing up in the sky, and the gladiator has to try and knock you off.
Legend is funny. Absolutely hurls himself into that role and obviously enjoys doing it. And he does very well on a lot of challenges too.
He really is an all-rounder in terms of challenges. We've seen him on all of them, I think, except possibly Unleash, the chasing game. And he is playing a character. Most of the gladiators are being themselves. My favourite one who's being himself is Nitro. From the women, I like Fury. She's very nice, very genuine, always congratulating the contestants and hugging them afterwards. And then another one who's really playing a character a lot of the time is Sabre.
She won the Weakest Link Gladiators special, didn't she? Excellent work there, Sabre. Which reminds me of the new referee, Mark Clattenburg. He was doing very well on that Weakest Link special. I think he was the last one voted out in the end. I do enjoy him though. He's no John Anderson. Well, who is? Despite the fact that we forgot to mention John Anderson on our original Gladiators podcast and had to come back and mention him in the next update podcast, I do think his Gladiators ready and so on have been for the past 30 years or so and will continue to be part of the national fabric. But Mark Clattenburg is a very good referee and a very fun TV presence as well.
Quite a clever choice, really, because he slightly reminds one of John Anderson, but also he's different, so you don't go, oh, they're just trying to copy John Anderson and it doesn't work.
You know who that reminds me of?
No.
Brian Dobson as Skeletor in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe 2002 pays clear homage to Alan Oppenheimer 1983, but also does his own thing and comes out as genuinely threatening and entertaining and sometimes funny. So there we are. Gladiators is the last game show great on this list that I have in front of me. Let's go through the 10 things on the list now and just say, have they had a reboot? Have they been going forever and therefore don't qualify for a reboot? Countdown has been running continuously since November 1982, so that's never needed a reboot, though it's certainly had plenty of revamps and set redressings and new presenters and new Carol along the way, as is inevitable over 40 plus years. 15-1, as was mentioned, the original run stretched into the 21st century and there was a reboot in the second decade of the 21st century. Blockbusters had its reboot on Challenge in 2012. I think possibly the day or very soon after the first episode of that aired, Bob Holness passed away, which really was quite apt because it's an absolute load of rubbish presented rather non-entertainingly by Simon Mayo. Family Fortunes, they've revamped that a few times. We've had Vernon Kay and his Celebrity Family Fortunes. More recently, we've had Gino D'Acampo doing a version of it. He's been disgraced now, so I suppose he won't be doing it again. But ITV may well dig up the format at some point. Wipeout has never come back, very much stuck in the late 90s, early 2000s. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire had a comeback with Jeremy Clarkson. Never watched that and certainly don't want to. Going for Gold, as we mentioned, had its reboot in the 21st century, but they haven't come back to it since 2009, so there you go. People who are desperate to make TV, there's something for you. Supermarket Sweep, as we said, a revamp with Dale in the noughties, a new version with Rylan, which must have been like 2019 and 20 because the second series got all messed up by lockdown, didn't it? Like so much. And yeah, Weakest Link and Gladiators, they're having revivals at the moment. And indeed, Sky One tried to revive Gladiators before in like the late noughties. They got John Anderson to come and referee the first series, and then he realised it was stupid and wouldn't do the second series, and they made 2 series in the end. They probably mucked about with that too much, unlike the BBC has done with its latest new version. So hopefully we'll see a few more series of that and of the Weakest Link. Speaking about these modern revivals has reminded me of the Crystal Maze, of course. We've talked before in the olden days about how we did enjoy the late 2010s reboot of that. Only ended up with 3 series in the end, including a rather shorter celebrity-only series where the medieval zone changed to the Eastern zone. And they really did that for the Americans coming over to make their version. They wanted the Eastern zone, and we didn't use it as much as they did. And then it was locked down and that all finished. But you never know when any of those formats are going to pop up again. Well, we don't know at the moment how much longer television as we know it is going to last. Certainly it's on the wane, but the game shows we've mentioned here have some very memorable, possibly exploitable formats. some very memorable presenters and contestants, some very memorable moments, and have been woven quite intrinsically into the fabric of our lives. And that's why we've talked about them here as game show greats. So hopefully you enjoyed some or all of us talking about those game show greats, and you will join us again in January as we look back at 10 years of the Olden Days podcast. One thing we'll be doing there is trying to tie up the very last few loose ends that I've spotted whilst uploading the entire Olden Days catalogue to Spotify. In the meantime, thanks for listening to this episode, and until January with 10 years of the Olden Days, good night out there.
Whatever you are.